Yes, people. So if you can't articulate your thoughts properly, you're going to really struggle in life, and it's such a massive, underrated aspect of our personal and spiritual growth that people don't talk about, because all we have is communication between each other. That's all we have, right? The language we use, this language is a tool for us to transfer ideas from one another. Whether it's an idea of I'm feeling like this and I want this person to resonate with me and help me understand my situation, or I've got this idea that I want to manifest into a business, or if I want to help this person. To do that, you have to use the language, the tool which is language. You have to be able to communicate effectively with people to get across your point of view, to express how you're feeling. And without this, you're going to really struggle to be able to transfer and manifest these ideas into actionable steps or into real world manifestations. So like the limits of your language are the limits of your world. And to really make this a priority, to start increasing the way you articulate yourself and increasing your vocabulary, because it's going to be a massive part of how you come across to people, how you map onto reality, and it's going to make a massive impact. So when I was growing up, when I was like 17, 18, I used to get so frustrated with myself and like increasingly mad because I had these ideas in my brain and I felt like I would understand topics, but when I would try to communicate with other people, I could never find the right words, and I'd get so caught up in my head and so anxious about using the right words and like how am I coming across, and like it was so frustrating because I could never actually come across the way I wanted to come across. I can never come across as like confident because I was always and ahhing. And when you're doing this, when you're using all these filler words like are, like what you're doing is you're coming across as less confident and less assertive, and you're not being as comprehensive to people. But if you can just pause, articulate yourself, find the right words for how you're feeling and what you want to get across towards people, you're going to come across in a more confident manner. So it's vitally important that you improve your articulation. And I think it's maybe one of the top aspects of self-improvement that garner respect. Like, look at politicians, how much power they have. They have power because they understand the human psychology, they know how to influence people, but they're also very good at articulating themselves, and through this, they can come across in a certain manner that maybe doesn't actually align with the person they are. And I'm not saying you want to improve your articulation to trick people, but you want to improve your articulation and to improve every aspect of your life, because the more words you have at your arsenal, the more you can dispense language and like transfer what you're thinking to actual tangible assets and ideas, then the better your life's going to be. So how do we go around improving our ability to articulate, and what steps should we first start taking? So if I look at the progress of me from when I was like 18 to where I am now, like I would never have thought I would have been able to sit in front of a podcast and talk for 20 minutes about a subject and not be stuttering all the time or not be at loss for words. But it's through taking these actionable steps that I've been allowed to do this, and I've been allowed to understand topics on a deeper level and then being able to communicate them to others. So what I would first say is, if you don't understand a topic, you're not going to be able to communicate it effectively. So you need to understand and read. So reading for me is at the core of articulation, because the more you read and the more you develop an understanding of what you want to talk about, the more vast amount of knowledge you have to tap into to use that as trying to get your point across. So say if you want to talk about business, for example, right? And you don't have a clue about business, you don't have a clue about marketing works, sales, and all of these, you're going to have a very limited amount of things to talk about. So that's going to keep your box of reference very small. You're not going to have a lot to communicate to others. But when you start understanding subjects a lot deeper and you read into them and you study them, you write your own notes, what you're going to do is you're going to have this vastness of knowledge which is sitting there, which you can actually bring up in a conversation, and you can communicate more clearly with people. So like, you need to be understanding subjects on a deeper level. So you need to be reading. After you've been reading and you've been understanding the subjects, what I like to do is I like to get a journal and I like to write down exactly how I've interpreted that subject. So I've read this book, right, and I've learned this, and this. That's cool, but until you've put it into your own words and you've related it to your own experience, you're going to struggle to communicate it to others effectively. So what I would do is I would read, and then once you've read something that you find effective, you find useful, you think would be of use for others, then you want to journal it and write it down. And how would you put that in your own words? And what this is going to do is this is going to kind of like remold your brain into applying that subject you've learned into your own life. And this solidifies that knowledge. And once you're doing this, you're articulating it into your own words and your own thoughts. So you're understanding it on a deeper level again. And this understanding is going to give you easier communication, as I said before. So read and journal. When you put things into your own thoughts and you put things on paper, you're being very deliberate about how you put it across. How do you actually want to articulate that bit of knowledge? How do you want it to be communicated to others? You're being very deliberate about that, and that's going to allow you to be clearer on what you want to talk about, and that clarity is going to allow you to communicate easier with others. So read and journal it. Them two are the core of what I would say are the pillars of articulation. And obviously your ability to talk is going to be massive because you have to talk to communicate with others. But if you don't have a lot of knowledge to talk about, then you're going to run out of subjects. And if you haven't put them into your own thoughts, you're going to struggle to fluently express them thoughts. So reading, journal. That's what I would start with. Also, what you get when you're reading and when you're journaling is you're picking up on new words. So you're reading a book and you might see this word that you don't quite understand, that you've never heard before, but you see it in this context of a book and you understand how that word would result in that context of what the author's talking about. And then you've learned this new word. You've literally learned a new word from reading a book. And that word is going to allow you to have more ability to express how you're feeling, because now you've got another tool. You've got another word to use to express how you're feeling. So all these feelings that are there in your brain, all these ideas that are there, the more words you have, the easier you can get them feelings into a package, or them ideas into a package that can be communicated to others. So through reading and through listening to podcasts, you're going to hear and open yourself up to new words which you probably don't understand. But when you hear them in the context of what someone's speaking or a sentence that someone's written, then you can kind of download that word into your brain, and that's another tool in your arsenal to use to communicate to others. So after you've done the journal and reading, what I'd recommend doing is practicing as much as possible to communicate these ideas to others. And this might be as simple as just putting your phone on and just recording yourself talk for 5 minutes. Like, that's all you have to do. Just have a subject and talk about it for 5 minutes, and you'll really see how little or how much you know and how well your ability is to articulate when you have to just talk uninterrupted for 5 minutes. And I suggest everyone does this. When I first started on YouTube, when I first started uploading videos, I created a separate channel where I just uploaded a video a day, which was 5 to 10 minutes of me talking uninterrupted about one subject. And what this allowed me to do was really get an understanding of how much do I understand this subject, and how easily can I transfer these ideas into someone else's brain, and how much can I articulate myself, how many words have I got, how calm can I be when communicating. I could reflect and then improve. And the more I did this, the more I started talking about subjects, the more I realized that I actually understand these subjects more and more because I'm readily communicating them to people. So that's another thing you can do. You can just literally get your phone and just record yourself for 5 to 10 minutes talking about a subject. What else you can do is when you're talking to people through text, so instead of actually texting people all the time and then taking really slow to write out this sentence, just get the voice notes up and send someone a voice note. And I started doing this so often where like I wouldn't text people anymore. I would just voice note them. And that again was practicing me talking. And I could be a lot more deliberate because if the voice note didn't go well, I could delete it and start again. And I could really be mindful of how I'm coming across without the social pressure of someone being right there. So this allowed me again to develop this flow of like consciousness where I could just like explain everything that's coming out without like umming and ahhing and second guessing myself. So I would recommend recording yourself, maybe on YouTube or just for you to keep, whatever it may be, and just talking about a subject for 5 minutes, sending voice notes to people and practicing talking to people and actually having conversations with people and seeing how that maps out, because it's very different like talking to a camera when you know no one's judging you, when you know no one's going to be interrupting you, and you know no one's going to be right there. But as soon as you get into a social scenario where someone's right in front of you, it's completely different, because you need to be aware of how engaged am I keeping this person? Am I boring this person? All these thoughts come up which cloud your judgment, and the more your judgments cloud, the more anxiety you have, the harder it's going to be to articulate yourself. So you want to practice having one-on-one communication with people as well. So Be willing to talk about the things you're learning. And this is one thing I didn't do for a while, was it? Like, I was learning all these things about self-improvement and self-development and spirituality, nutrition, but I was so embarrassed to share to people. So I'd go to work and I would just pretend to be this lad who goes out drinking all the time and partying. But in reality, I actually wanted to discuss the philosophical book I read on the weekend, or the insight I had into meditation. But because I wasn't explaining these things and communicating them with people, I was just keeping them boxed in my own brain, and I was getting like muddled with my ideas of what I thought I knew about these subjects. But as soon as I became confident in myself and realized I'm happy and willing to talk about these subjects, and like I had this little mindset shift where I was like, I'm actually just going to talk about the things I'm interested in and see if people relate to me, instead of trying to relate to others by talking about things they're interested in. And it was this switch in a mindset of like, stop caring what people think, stop trying to impress others, and just talk about what you want to talk about. And this really allowed me just to start talking about things I'm interested in. And through that conversations, I'd have these interesting conversations with people, and I'd learn something from him. I'd learn something from him. I'd be impressed about how much I knew and how I articulated it to this person. And I started gaining confidence in my ability to articulate and talk. So that's another like tip and trick I can give you, is actually just go out there and practice these things. Find people that you can talk to. The next one I'm going to talk about, which I always talk about in every podcast, is meditation. And how this allowed me to improve my articulation was it stopped me from getting stuck in my head so much. So one of my biggest downfalls was I was so self-analytical, especially in conversations with people in social situations, but also when I would sit down to record a video, I'd always be self-doubting and second-guessing myself. And what this led to was me like being in conversation and being in the flow and actually articulating myself properly, and then having this little voice pop up in my head and going, you're not making sense. What are you talking about? You don't know what you're talking about. And instead of just noting that voice and letting it go, I would get consumed by that thought. I would get consumed by that emotion. And then that would take me on a tangent and get me off my ability to articulate. And then I'd start stuttering and ahhing. Then I'd get nervous and anxious and get stuck in my head. And then I'd be stuck in this vicious cycle of thinking, you're not making sense. What you're doing, you're anxious, you're acting weird. And this would then take you out of the conversation and take you out of the subject you're talking about. So the more you meditate, the more you can just notice this thought, and it can just pop and go. So as I'm talking to you in this video now, like a couple of times, I've had this thought and this nagging voice come up going, you're not making sense. Like, you're umming and ahhing. Look at the way you articulate yourself. Look at the way you're standing. Your face looks chubby. All these like different shit, right? All these different voices and thoughts, they've been coming up, and I've just been watching them and letting them go. So the more you can do this, the more you can meditate, the more you can be present with what you're talking about, and the more you can flow without second guessing yourself. And that confidence and reassurance in yourself of just letting things flow is really important, because the more you get stuck in your head and you start second guessing yourself, you're going to start doubting, and then you're going to start tripping up. The next thing is, don't be scared to pause. And this is one thing I struggle with that I'm trying to implement the more I do this podcast, is like when you're talking, so like I did it there. So I paused, but then I second guessed myself and said like. So if you just pause, really think about what you need to talk about, this is going to help you kind of model your thoughts back together and like compose yourself. And also it's going to show a certain amount of assertiveness when you're talking to someone. So say if you're in a conversation, for example, and you pause for 5 seconds and you don't go and fill in the awkward silence, it's going to show that you're comfortable with that silence. You're comfortable with just it being silent, nothing happening, and you're assured in yourself that you're going to communicate still, and you're going to get across what you need to get across. And it shows confidence and self-assurance. So never be afraid to pause. Just like pause, let it breathe, calm down, and then come back to what you was talking about. And on this topic, I want to talk about like one thing I do really wrong, which I've had some feedback from people that have like analysed my podcast, is talking very quickly. And sometimes it can be interpreted when you talk quickly as like you don't have this belief in yourself that what you're saying is valuable, so you're trying to get it out as quick as possible so people don't uninterrupt you, or so you can get what you need to talk about done quickly and then you can move on. But if you just slow down and be a lot more deliberate and slow, people are going to resonate with you more and they're going to understand you more. So that's one thing I do wrong, which I'm going to start trying to implement. So that is how I'd go around articulating yourself. They're just the things I've done that have allowed me to really develop a vocabulary at my arsenal, which I can use to communicate with others. And honestly, now, like, social situations don't seem nowhere near as scary, because I know I'm not going to and and use like and loads of filler words, because I've got the vocabulary in my mind to communicate what I'm thinking and feeling. So there's not as much pressure on the social situations. Then again, when I do these podcasts, I know I have the vocabulary and I have the knowledge to articulate what I'm thinking and feeling. So I've got a calmness over me. I'm not nervous about doing the podcast. So it's going to improve every aspect of your life. It's going to improve your dating life, your communication skills, your social life, your work. People are going to respect you more. So all of this comes from just being able to articulate yourself. So people, that was my episode on how to articulate yourself. I've been a bit lazy this week and didn't write any notes. I was meant to do a podcast on social anxiety, but I've just been distracted by this, that, and I've just not had my core purpose aligned with my actions. So this social anxiety podcast is going to be a big one for me. So I'm going to start working on it now, and I'm going to make sure it's ready for you to take a lot of value from. But that was my episode on articulation. If you found it useful, make sure you leave a rating and give me some feedback. So yes, people, thank you very much for listening. I'll see you all in the next episode.